Matt, and the main reason is the source. This has come from Sally Bedell-Smith, who's a very, very well-respected royal biographer. She was extremely close to Lady Elizabeth Anson, who was a confidant and a cousin of the Queen. And Liza Shackley, as Sally Bedell-Smith likes to call her.
Nobody saw this coming. Meghan Markle's secret first husband has finally broken his silence. And what he revealed has left King Charles completely speechless. Hidden for years, this truth could expose everything about Meghan and Harry's marriage that the palace never wanted you to know. The confession is shaking the royal family to its core, and the fallout could change the monarchy forever. What did he say that has stunned even the king?
All those who served in the armed forces, the uniformed services, the home front, indeed all the people of this country, the Commonwealth, and beyond.
Before she was ever a duchess, before royal titles and world media, Meghan Markle lived a life that has largely remained hidden, or at least unspoken. In this first chapter, we explore the earliest whispers of a past that few know, but which some claim shaped everything that came after. Meghan Rachel Markle was born in 1981 in Los Angeles, California. Her upbringing in Southern California, her early challenges, her efforts in acting and social work, these are all well documented. But there exists a narrative beyond the public biography, one that suggests a chapter of her life deliberately erased. This story begins in Chicago, in the mid-1990s, when Meghan, still far from fame, may have crossed paths with Joe Giuliano, a young man rooted in a tightly knit Italian-American community. According to the versions of this tale, their relationship began quietly, privately, and ultimately ended in silence. The Giuliano family, it is claimed, would go so far as to wipe out the very traces of their union. To begin, we must acknowledge that the evidence for much of this story is indirect, circumstantial, and in many cases speculative. There is no publicly accepted proof that Meghan and Joe Giuliano were ever married. That said, the persistence of claims, the silences, and the shadows left behind have attracted attention from those who study the fringes of celebrity, secrecy, and personal reinvention. Imagine Meghan as a young woman in Chicago, ambitious, sharp, polished, with a resolve to escape the ordinary. She had ideas beyond staying in one place, conversations that seemed to test boundaries, and an intensity pressing her forward. Opposite her, Joe Giuliano was quiet, dependable, rooted in a family for whom tradition, loyalty, and reputation mattered. Where she saw possibility, he perhaps saw stability. According to the narrative, the two were drawn together quickly. Conversations became secret plans. Glances became moments of promise. Within months, they allegedly slipped away to Las Vegas, into a small chapel with only minimal witnesses. No photos, no public record. In that version, even local documentation was later sealed or erased, rendering the event nearly invisible to the world. The Giuliano family, by some accounts, welcomed Meghan at first. But over time, small inconsistencies began to fuel suspicion. To Joe's mother, details that didn't quite align, stories shifting slightly, timelines that didn't quite match, began to feel like pieces of a puzzle intentionally warped. One version even claims that Meghan once told acquaintances she had graduated in 1994, even though classmates recalled her finishing years later. Though small, such discrepancies, to those attuned to consistency, signaled something deeper, someone rewriting their life, perhaps from the inside. As whisperings of ambition and reinvention grew stronger, the Giuliano family reportedly did what was common to close communities with strong values. They grew uneasy. Sunday dinner conversations, family traditions, reputations. They all appeared threatened by the idea that Meghan's world was quietly reshaping itself around something that might leave the family behind. Joe, caught between love and loyalty, struggled. Some who claim to have seen him say he became quieter, less certain, more reserved. The person who once laughed freely and spoke with confidence began to withdraw. To protect Meghan from prying questions, he distanced himself from his own family. But distancing led to silence. Silence led to suspicion. In the telling of this version, Meghan's ambitions became the focal point. Auditions, moves, conversations of a life beyond the Midwest. The Giulianos watched as their son drifted. In their view, her presence had morphed from hopeful partner to threat. The family began to think of her not as a future daughter-in-law, but as someone infiltrating, someone studying, someone poised to move on. This tension eventually reached a breaking point. Meghan's visits to Joe's family became shorter, correspondence faded. Even as the connection cooled, the traces of what had happened were being scrubbed away. The chapel in Las Vegas ceased to exist on paper. The local records vanished. Witnesses were unreachable. The union, if it had ever been more than rumor, was now invisible. The Giuliano family's reaction in this telling was not merely heartbreak, but a move to erase, to protect their name, to reclaim their sense of order. Some say they sealed their lips, retreated, and refused to speak of it. Others say they took legal or financial measures behind closed doors. Whatever the case, the narrative holds that by the time Meghan walked away, or drove away, the Giuliano name was all that remained. The marriage, the memory, the person, gone from their world. What strikes the imagination is how thoroughly the erasure is claimed to have occurred. Public records show Meghan Markle having been single before her later marriage, with no mention of an earlier union. Observers note that no documents, photographs, or credible legal records have surfaced to substantiate a marriage to Joe Giuliano. Rumors around this story often point out that many of its elements are ghostly. Whisper networks, half-heard conversations, claims of sealed records. Yet the strength of the narrative lies not necessarily in its verifiable details, but in the gaps. The very absence of proof becomes, to some, a signal of concealment. The silence becomes louder than testimony. The missing pieces become parts of the mystery. When we reconstruct part 1 for a video script, the goal is not to assert this narrative as fact, but to present it clearly, neutrally, with the tensions laid bare, and to acknowledge along the way where the line between claim and corroboration is uncertain. In visual or spoken narration, you might pair sweeping shots of Chicago streets, archival cityscapes, Las Vegas chapels, all places that evoke distance and disappearance, with a voiceover that tracks the timeline as it is claimed. Use ambient tones, light shifts, and pacing to convey the tension of two worlds colliding. A deeply traditional family, and a woman moving against the pull of small-town roots into something bigger. When Meghan's connection to Joe Giuliano began to fade, what remained was not a calm resolution, but a gathering storm of questions unanswered, voices silenced, and fragments of what once was. Those who tell this version of the story say that Joe never again spoke her name in the home that had once echoed with her presence. Her absence lingered, like a scent that cannot be scrubbed away, but one people prefer to avoid. Joe's mother, identified in these accounts as Anna, reputedly kept a single photograph of Meghan hidden in a drawer, not as an homage, but as proof that the woman had existed in their life. For her, the eyes in that picture stirred discomfort more than nostalgia. They were not the eyes of a lost daughter-in-law. They were, in her mind, the eyes of someone calculating, someone quietly assessing. The Giulianos, as this narrative goes, began to pore over what little remained. Notes, letters, receipts, anything tying Meghan to the family. Their attorney, in some versions of the tale, quietly collected documents and sealed them. Rumors later claimed that a page of legal paperwork existed, signed by both parties, whose content was understood only by the lawyer, who then vanished from public record. The impression given is of layers being constructed. Layers of paperwork, of silence, of legal boundaries drawn in invisible ink. A few neighbors later recalled seeing Meghan leave one evening in a dark car, expression unreadable. She didn't say goodbye. It was as though she had rehearsed the exit long before it came. Around that time, mysterious calls, once or twice in the dead of night, came to Joe's family's landline. A woman's voice whispered, "Forget me," then hung up. Nobody could confirm the voice was hers, but in the silence that followed, it became a solemn punctuation mark, the removal of a ghost. From the Giulianos' perspective, these events may have confirmed what they already feared, that Meghan was not exiting because her feelings had cooled, but because she was orchestrating her disappearance. In the telling, the family believed she was systematically excising her former life and all those tied to it, from the emerging public identity she was now building. For Joe, the shift was visible to some who claimed to know him. He withdrew from social circles. He ended friendships that might prompt questions. He abandoned public visibility and turned inward. The bright young man with a steady voice and warmth gave way to someone more tentative, more cautious, more absent. Reports connected him to late-night working in small accounting offices, away from the family firm. He reportedly avoided meetings, social calls, parties, anything that risked drawing attention to his name. In time, rumors began circulating in Chicago that Joe had been paid or had signed some agreement to keep silent. No credible proof ever surfaced, but the change in Joe was plain. His older vibrancy dimmed, replaced by a quiet distance that seemed sadder than it was secretive. Meanwhile, the Giuliano family's posture shifted. Some say Joe's father whispered to a visiting priest that if Meghan ever returned, they couldn't protect her again. That sentence, in this telling, marked their withdrawal not just from Meghan, but from the truth they'd all agreed to bury. What had been a rift between woman and family turned into a chasm separating them from memory itself. As Meghan's public profile grew, slowly but steadily, what interests those who look closely is how much of her past appears scrubbed clean. No mention of a first marriage surfaces in official records. Her personal narrative focuses on a life of Hollywood auditions, social activism, and reinvention. The version of her life everyone sees does not include Chicago, Joe, or a secret ceremony in Las Vegas. Investigative journalists and those curious about hidden history sometimes note peculiar gaps: early college records with missing semesters, sealed documents, witnesses impossible to trace. The absence of evidence in places where one would expect it only enlarges the blank spaces in her biography. From the Giuliano family's vantage, the erasure was painful and deliberate. Some say they sold their business quietly, withdrew from the public eye, and severed financial ties. They retreated, closed doors, and slipped into a form of exile. To them, speaking her name again risked opening wounds that they had long agreed to keep closed. It's in this silencing that the heart of Part 2 lies. Not only did Meghan fade from their lives, but the Giulianos also began to remove themselves, emotionally and, eventually, geographically. The family avoided their presence. They became absent in a way that mirrors what she became. Present in public, absent in their memory. In lines between the claims, however, linger many uncertainties. There is no independent, verifiable proof that the Giulianos held secret files, or that they collected legal documents in a sealed cache. There is no confirmed record of mysterious late-night calls to the family home. The lawyer who allegedly kept the sealed paper is untraceable, if he existed at all. That some of these events are unverifiable is part of what gives the story its ghostly dimension. Nevertheless, what is compelling is the suggestion that the Giulianos altered their lives in response to her absence. The transformation is not just hers, but theirs. If Meghan's path forward was one of reinvention, theirs was to recede. The silent home, the wedding chapel that vanished from records, the family business closed. These are the quiet responses to a dynamic they neither accepted nor fully understood. When the Giuliano family disappeared from Chicago, there were no headlines, no police reports, and no formal goodbyes. One morning, neighbors noticed a moving truck arrive before dawn. By midday, the house stood empty. Curtains fluttered in the open windows, furniture polish lingered in the air, and the name Giuliano remained faintly printed on the mailbox. To those who lived nearby, it was as if the family had folded itself into silence overnight. This moment marked a turning point in what had already been a story built on uncertainty. The Giulianos had once been a known family in their local Italian-American community. Quiet, steady, involved in small business and church activities. They were respected but private. After their sudden disappearance, speculation replaced familiarity. Nobody could agree on where they had gone or why they left so abruptly. A few neighbors recalled seeing Anna Giuliano standing outside in the early morning light the day before they left. She was said to have spoken softly to a woman from the next street over, mentioning that the family was taking time away. But her tone, according to the neighbor, was strained, as though the words were rehearsed rather than true. Joe was not seen that morning. Only the movers, quiet and efficient, entered the home. Boxes were labeled with nothing more than initials, AG, GG, and one smaller label marked simply with the letter L. The following week, a small parcel arrived at a nearby home. The envelope bore no full name, only the initials AG, and the postmark was smudged beyond reading. Inside, the neighbor, identified in later retellings as a woman named Clara, found a child's bracelet engraved with the name Lucia. No one in the neighborhood recalled a Giuliano child with that name. Clara, puzzled, showed it to the parish priest. His reaction was immediate. He reportedly went pale and told her to burn it, warning her that it was not meant for her to keep. Clara did not destroy it. She placed it in a tin box beneath her bed, unable to decide if it was evidence of something real or simply an odd message meant to be found. It was this mysterious bracelet that later fed one of the most unsettling rumors surrounding the family's disappearance, that a child had been involved, and that the child was the reason they left Chicago. Some claimed the girl named Lucia was Joe's daughter. Others whispered she was Meghan's. Both possibilities carried consequences that might explain why the family went to such lengths to vanish. Within local circles, the whispers multiplied. A few former acquaintances suggested that Anna had once been seen visiting a doctor's office, accompanied by a small child, several months before the family moved. Others said they had heard a young girl laughing in the backyard late one evening during that same period. Yet, when questioned, no one could produce a single photograph, record, or relative who could confirm that the Giulianos had a daughter. It was as though the possibility existed only in rumor, never in fact. At the same time, public traces of Meghan Markle's early life were becoming clearer, but in a way that seemed to exclude this chapter entirely. She was appearing in Los Angeles, taking on small acting roles, building connections in the entertainment world. Nothing in those records suggested she had any link to Chicago or the Giuliano family. Her background, as she presented it, was a straightforward path: a Los Angeles upbringing, college studies, early career struggles, and persistence toward success. The simplicity of that story stood in sharp contrast to the complex rumors emerging from Chicago. For those who examine these two trajectories side by side, the disappearance of one family and the rise of one young actress, the timing was striking. The Giulianos reportedly vanished in the late 1990s, the same period when Meghan began reappearing in public life under her own name. Correlation, of course, does not imply causation, but it was enough for some to connect the dots, even if those dots were faint. Investigative interest grew over the years, particularly from local journalists who specialized in forgotten stories. Some attempted to locate records of the Giulianos' property sale, but found that the deed transfer listed an anonymous trust rather than an individual buyer. Others looked for forwarding addresses, bank accounts, or business registrations tied to the name, only to find them closed or inactive. One journalist noted that their family business, once a modest but steady accounting firm, had been liquidated quietly, with profits unaccounted for. To those searching, it appeared that the Giulianos had not simply moved, they had erased themselves. Speculation then shifted overseas. A series of unverified reports surfaced claiming that a couple matching the Giulianos' description had been seen in southern Italy, living under assumed names. Local villagers supposedly knew them as Joseph and Anna Lucia, a name curiously similar to that engraved on the bracelet found in Chicago. The story goes that they kept mostly to themselves, attended church irregularly, and raised a young girl who rarely spoke in public. None of these claims have been independently confirmed, and no official documentation has been made public. But the repetition of similar accounts across different towns suggested that at least some element of the rumor might be rooted in truth. If this Italian chapter did occur, It represented a full transformation for the family. They had traded their name, their country, and their history for anonymity. Those who claimed to have met them described them as polite but wary, speaking Italian with an accent that was distinctly American. They lived modestly, reportedly avoiding neighbors' questions and steering conversation away from their past. One man who later spoke anonymously to a journalist described the husband, Joseph, as quiet, gentle, and always scanning his surroundings before answering even simple questions. The wife, Anna Lucia, was said to be protective of the girl, often holding her close in public places. Meanwhile, back in the United States, faint traces of this hidden narrative occasionally surfaced in unexpected ways. In early university records belonging to Meghan Markle, researchers noticed a brief unexplained gap, roughly 1 semester. During the same period, she was said to have left Chicago. The reason for that gap was never recorded. Administrators cited privacy laws and closed archives to public inquiry. This detail may be insignificant on its own, but to those who already believed in the Giuliano story, it reinforced the sense that something had been erased or concealed during that time. Over the years, the story of the Giuliano's disappearance took on a life of its own, shifting from a family mystery into local legend. Each retelling added or lost pieces. Some versions framed the family as victims of circumstance. Others portrayed them as participants in a voluntary exile, perhaps even in protection of someone else. The possibility of a child, whether real or imagined, remained the narrative's emotional center. If a girl named Lucia did exist, her existence would have represented both a bond and a threat, proof of a connection that someone, somewhere, had an interest in hiding. By the early 2000s, rumors of the family in Italy grew quieter. Those who had once claimed to know them stopped answering questions. When journalists attempted to track property records in small Sicilian towns, they encountered incomplete archives, untraceable surnames, and uncooperative local officials. Whether through coincidence or deliberate protection, the trail ended abruptly. It was as though the Giulianos had simply merged into the landscape, anonymous and untraceable. Back in the United States, Meghan's career began to gain momentum. She secured acting roles, appeared in network television, and built a reputation for discipline and intelligence. Interviews from that period portray a young woman focused on her craft, articulate about her ambitions, and careful about her personal history. None of her public statements mention a prior marriage, a secret relationship, or time spent living in the Midwest. The narrative of reinvention, central to many celebrity stories, was complete. Whatever her past had been, the version that reached the public was linear and polished. The contrast between that public trajectory and the whispered fate of the Giulianos remains the core tension of this part of the story. Two lives that once allegedly intersected now seem to move in opposite directions, one toward visibility, the other into deliberate invisibility. Observers have drawn parallels between these opposing movements, one representing ascent, the other retreat, as though each was the mirror image of the other's survival strategy. The more time passed, the harder it became to separate fact from speculation. Those attempting to verify the story faced the problem that always arises in such cases. Silence protects both truth and fiction equally. If a family wished to disappear quietly, the absence of evidence would look identical to the absence of reality. And if someone's past had indeed been carefully curated, the resulting narrative would appear seamless by design. Without records, without witnesses willing to speak, the mystery becomes self-perpetuating. Yet, even within that silence, fragments surface now and again. Decades after the alleged disappearance, a single photograph appeared in an online archive associated with a local Italian newspaper. It depicted a woman at a flower stall in a small coastal town. Her face was partly obscured by a scarf, but beside her stood a young girl with striking features and a faintly familiar smile. The resemblance to Meghan Markle, some argued, was undeniable. The photo was never authenticated, and the publication later removed it after legal correspondence. Whether coincidence or clue, it reignited interest in the story that refused to die. This chapter, when viewed neutrally, is less about hidden scandals or secret heirs than about the power of disappearance itself. In a world that increasingly records everything, a story built on erasure stands out. The idea that a family could simply vanish, and that their vanishing might be connected, however distantly, to someone who later became globally recognized, has fascinated readers, journalists, and online commentators alike. It is important to emphasize that no official investigation has ever substantiated claims of a child, an erased marriage, or a family exile linked to Meghan Markle. Public records as they stand confirm only her documented history. The Giuliano story, at best, remains an unsolved footnote, an anecdote whispered between communities. At worst, it may be no more than folklore shaped by coincidence, embellishment, and the human tendency to fill gaps in narratives with imagination. Still, the persistence of the rumor reveals something deeper about how stories survive. People are drawn to the idea that even the most visible lives might contain invisible beginnings. That somewhere behind the photographs, interviews, and official biographies, there could exist another version, less perfect, more human, perhaps even more real. As years passed, the mystery surrounding the Giuliano family began to fade from public attention, buried under newer stories, royal headlines, and the fast-moving pace of digital news. Yet for a small circle of journalists and curious researchers, the unanswered questions never completely disappeared. The family's sudden relocation, the sealed documents, and the scattered clues left behind continued to raise quiet speculation. In online communities and message boards, people began piecing together timelines, searching for any connection between the Giuliano's disappearance and Meghan Markle's later rise to fame. Most of what they found was circumstantial, fragments that hinted at coincidence rather than evidence. Still, the narrative had taken on a life of its own. In the early 2000s, when internet archives and digital records became more accessible, amateur investigators revisited the story. Some claimed to have found property transfers linked to the Giuliano name in Italy and Canada, while others said there were gaps in the public record that matched the family's supposed departure from Chicago. Nothing concrete ever surfaced, yet the lack of clarity only deepened curiosity. Silence often fuels imagination, and in this case, the lack of verifiable data became the perfect ground for speculation. By the time Meghan Markle became a public figure through her acting career, particularly after joining the cast of the television series Suits, the story of her supposed connection to Joe Giuliano was already circulating on obscure online forums. It wasn't part of mainstream discussion, but it lingered on the internet's fringes, where unverified claims often find traction. When Meghan later married Prince Harry, the story resurfaced in waves. People began reposting old threads, some claiming to have insider information or forgotten photographs, while others tried to trace the origins of the rumor itself. Reputable fact-checking organizations reviewed the claims and found no credible evidence to support them. Public records showed no official marriage to anyone by that name, and the alleged photos were traced to unrelated sources. Still, the myth endured. For many, it was less about whether it was true and more about what it symbolized. It represented the fascination with transformation, the idea that someone could completely rewrite their past and rise into a world of royalty. It's a theme that resonates deeply in public imagination, especially in an era obsessed with reinvention. Meghan's life story, from a California upbringing to the global stage, already had the elements of modern mythology. The Giuliano tale simply added an extra layer of intrigue for those eager to find hidden chapters. Over time, journalists and cultural analysts began to look not at the rumor itself, but at the ecosystem that allowed it to thrive. In media studies, Meghan Markle became an example of how narratives about women, particularly women in the public eye, often shift depending on perception and agenda. Some commentators pointed out that stories like the Giuliano mystery reflected a larger pattern, the way speculation tends to fill the space left by privacy. When someone chooses to keep parts of their life quiet, especially in an age of constant exposure, that silence becomes a canvas for invention. Meanwhile, discussions about the Giuliano family evolved as well. What began as a romantic or scandalous subplot turned into a broader symbol of disappearance and identity. Some online users speculated that the family's supposed vanishing was an allegory or fabrication that grew out of internet storytelling. Others believed that if the family ever existed, they likely moved for ordinary reasons, unrelated to Meghan Markle at all. What kept the story alive wasn't new evidence, but emotional continuity, the sense of mystery that human beings naturally gravitate toward. In 2020, with renewed public interest in Meghan and Prince Harry following their decision to step back from royal duties, the older rumors were dredged up once again. Social media users began sharing edited videos, retelling the Giuliano narrative as though it were hidden history. Some of these posts gained significant traction, viewed millions of times. In many cases, the tone of these videos blurred the line between fact and fiction, presenting speculation as revelation. Media literacy experts began addressing the phenomenon, noting how easily storytelling techniques can make fabricated histories feel authentic. They pointed to the power of tone, pacing, and emotional framing, the same techniques used in documentaries and true crime series, to give unverified stories a sense of credibility. Researchers studying digital folklore described the Giuliano story as a form of modern myth-making. They argued that the internet doesn't just spread information. It creates shared stories that feel real because they're emotionally resonant, even when unsupported by evidence. Much like urban legends of the past, these online tales adapt over time, changing with each retelling. The core idea, a secret past, a hidden family, a mystery erased, remains constant, but the details evolve to fit new contexts. In this way, the Giuliano narrative became less about Meghan Markle herself and more about what her public image represents: transformation, secrecy, and the human desire to uncover hidden truths. As more journalists revisited the origins of the rumor, many traced it back to early tabloid speculation and unverified online posts from anonymous sources. Some pointed out how easily digital content, once shared without verification, can resurface years later as though it were newly discovered. In interviews, media analysts noted that celebrity culture often amplifies this process. When a figure like Meghan Markle becomes globally recognized, every detail, confirmed or otherwise, takes on exaggerated significance. The combination of fame, controversy, and public fascination with royalty creates a feedback loop where rumors are almost impossible to extinguish completely. By 2023, the story had fragmented into countless versions. Some online storytellers presented it as historical truth. Others framed it as a mystery unsolved by design. Independent researchers attempted to verify any connection between Meghan Markle and a person named Joe Giuliano through public archives, marriage licenses, and court documents. None found credible matches. In official biographical material and public records, there was no trace of such a relationship. Mainstream publications that investigated the rumor concluded that it was an internet fabrication, perhaps inspired by older urban legends about celebrities erasing their pasts. Yet even after being widely debunked, the narrative persisted. This persistence became a case study in how misinformation operates. Experts in communication theory observed that once a story fits emotionally with what people already believe or want to believe, it becomes resistant to correction. The Giuliano rumor fits comfortably within a broader cultural fascination with secrecy, power, and the cost of ambition. For some, it was a cautionary tale about fame. For others, it was simply entertainment disguised as revelation. As the online noise quieted, a few thoughtful commentators began to reframe the discussion entirely. Instead of asking whether the story was true, they asked why people wanted it to be. Why do audiences, even in an age of transparency, still crave the idea of secret pasts and lost families? Psychologists studying narrative identity suggested that such stories allow people to explore moral and emotional themes safely. The concept of someone reinventing themselves, of escaping one life to begin another, mirrors universal human desires for change and control. Meghan Markle's very public transition, from actor to duchess, from private citizen to one of the most scrutinized women in the world, made her a natural canvas for those themes. In recent years, as public discussions around media responsibility and online misinformation have become more serious, the Giuliano rumor is often cited as a reminder of how digital storytelling can distort memory. It demonstrates how easily emotional storytelling can override factual accuracy, especially when blended with the visual style and tone of investigative journalism. Educators now use examples like this to teach digital literacy, showing students how to identify unreliable sources, trace information back to its origin, and understand how confirmation bias shapes perception. At the same time, the rumor's endurance underscores the difficulty of controlling one's narrative in the digital age. For public figures, every silence can be misinterpreted as mystery, every gap as evidence. In Meghan Markle's case, her decision to maintain privacy about parts of her personal life was, paradoxically, what kept speculation alive. When she and Prince Harry later spoke openly about the pressures of public scrutiny, those comments were viewed differently depending on which version of her story people already believed. It highlighted the fragmented nature of truth in modern media, where facts compete not just with fiction, but with emotion, imagination, and algorithmic amplification. As of today, there remains no verifiable record of a connection between Meghan Markle and anyone named Joe Giuliano, nor any documented disappearance of a family linked to her early life. The original story, though rich in narrative detail, appears to be a construction of collective imagination, a digital folklore shaped by repetition and emotional resonance. Yet its endurance has had a real impact, influencing public perception and reminding audiences how fragile truth can become once it enters the world of mass storytelling. In the end, the Giuliano mystery tells us less about Meghan Markle herself and more about the audience that shaped and sustained it. It reflects the tension between curiosity and evidence, between the human need for meaning and the modern struggle to verify what we see and hear. The story may have begun as fiction, but its persistence reveals a deeper truth about how we create and consume modern myths. Whether whispered in online forums or retold in video narratives, the idea of a hidden past remains powerful because it speaks to something timeless, the belief that behind every polished image lies a secret waiting to be discovered. And so, the Giuliano story remains, not as proof of an event, but as a mirror of our own fascination with mystery. In the end, the question is not whether it happened, but why we keep wanting it to. The truth, like the family at the heart of the tale, may have vanished long ago. What lingers is the echo of curiosity, still alive in the digital corridors of our collective imagination.